Right Night is a talk show with published authors, writers, and content creators discussing both the creative and technical sides of writing, as well as the industry surrounding it, from novels to screenplays to comics and more. And now, here's your host, author Travis Sivart.
Welcome to Right Night. We'll get to the topic and discussion in just a moment. For those listening to the podcast, we record the podcast on our live stream at twitch.tv/Travis Tavern Talk, and we have a live interactive chat audience. You might hear the sound of the bell ding, and that means I want to interrupt somebody to read a comment or question. For those on the live stream, we won't read off everything you put in chat, but we'll try to get to the most relevant, the most amusing, or some combination of the both. Now, while we introduce ourselves, go and let us know what you're reading, writing, or creating tonight. And while everybody puts that in chat, I'll introduce myself. I am Travis Sivart, author of series such as Journal of a Stranger and Portals, and recently released Silver and Smith. So, let's introduce you guys. Aaron, it's been a little bit since you've been here. Why don't we start with you?
It has. Hi, Aaron Kennedy. I'm author of the Ships of Valor series, Persona Non Grata. Stories of a AI spaceship wandering the universe with his buddy Aerie. Also been a technical writer for 25 years. Been published in the Army Times and the NCO Journal. Yeah, that's about it.
Pass it over to Tara.
All right. My name is Tara Moeller. I am Dreamer-in-Chief at Dreampunk Press. I am also published author. My latest is a sci-fi novella, Placebo, and you can get that from www.dreampunkpress.com. And I have recently been published in the ACES magazine, which is the National Editing Society in the United States. So want to plug that.
Congratulations. Well done.
I'm feeling good about that.
Yay, you.
Now, our topic tonight is beat sheets for this episode of Right Night. So, tell you what, I'm going to give a quick general description of what a beat sheet is and what it's for and what it does, and then you guys just tack on whatever knowledge you have or whatever I missed, or argue with what I say. So a beat sheet is, in essence, something to help you plan the plot points and expected things in a story. It generally works with a 3-act story where the first act is 25%, the second act is the next 50%, and the last act is the last 25%. And some people have compared it to a circus tent with the way it peaks at like 33% for a pinch point, and then the midpoint, and then again, and then heading into the climaxes. So, in general, most common beat sheet has up to 28 points to match, but there is actually 40 points, according to the mythology of the beat sheet, to hit. The others are just freeform that you could put where you want. And I'm going to leave it there and let somebody else add to that, detract from it, or argue with it.
I'm not going to argue. The only time I've used a beat sheet is when I was working on the mystery novel that has yet to be published, because I really, really needed guidance on where to put, because there are beat sheets for specific genres. There is a beat sheet for mystery novels. So I went and got one, and because for mysteries, there's some little additional, some of those beats that are in that extra beats that Travis spoke about. In a mystery, you still need to have them in very specific places, i.e. those are the clues. There's a place that you put the red herring clue. There's a specific place thereabouts where you should be putting where your main character realizes it was a red herring.
The body.
And in order to, and I didn't know that. It was the first mystery I'd ever tried to write. And I really needed that guidance for a new genre. So using that beat sheet, I wrote an outline. It was the first time I ever actually did an outline in order to hit those spots where I needed the clues to drop, where that red herring needed to be, etc. Made sure that in my outline I put down, hey, this is supposed to be third of the way, this is at the halfway point, etc. And then I wrote the novel. And then I went back afterwards, found those points, figured out where they were in the grand scheme of things of my page count, and then kind of tried to work around and make my edits so that they fell round about where they were supposed to fall. It is a guide, and you have to remember, you don't have to treat it like it has to be on page 10 and it has to be on page 20. That second be on page 21.
If I may, you know what? I'll comment back to that specific point in a moment. I want to give Aaron a chance to talk before I drag it away.
Honestly, when she mentioned the page 20, page 21, nuanced disagreement only because of one thing. I come from the comic book world where you've got very specific things that do have to happen on page 20, page 21. Your centerfold's always such and such page. You've got specific splash pages that have to happen exactly here. And it's not necessarily true in book format, but you're telling a very similar style of story. And then when we get into the screen media and things like that, we also run into this, oh, we've got the break happening here. We've got the large commercial break here. We're in a 60-minute format. We're broken it down into 42 minutes. We've got X number of commercials. You've got your opening credits. You've got your closing credits and all this. So there's little things that have to happen on the beats.
Right.
And what I'm trying to do is the guys like Gerard Way, My Chemical Romance, who did the Umbrella Academy, which has been converted over to the Netflix. Do we write for adaptation, which is going to go into one of our later speaking points? What do we do for the adaptations and things like that? Yes, we're primarily a book-based format, but how are we envisioning this later on, and what are the beats going to be? So for your mystery novel, you mentioned that, and the first two that popped up to me are the classic Clue, Tim Curry running around, and then Knives Out, which is another great example of the genre. And they've got very specific beats that happen there, but Clue itself would not work as a book format, whereas Knives Out would be an excellent book. Back to you, Travis, in regards to the page counts and stuff.
I was going to lean over into beat sheets, as far as I have found, were primarily meant for movies to begin with. Now, there are pacing sheets for writing, but beat sheets in specific were movies. And here's what I'll tell you. Go grab a super popular movie that we all love, such as Indiana Jones, and grab a blank beat sheet. Check your time on that DVD or Blu-ray, stream, play, and then pause it at 25%, 33 or to 37%, 50%, and write what's happening in that story, and you will find that movie, which, by the way, is not that good of a movie. It was fun and great for the era, but looking back, it's not that great of a movie. It's a good movie. But the beats are bang, spot on. Now, a few other movies, such as John Carter and Cowboys and Aliens, would hold up against Indiana Jones, but the beats are off. If you look at it, some of the pacing is 5 to 10 minutes off where we expected. Humans are wired psychologically when hearing stories to expect certain things at certain times. Lulls, peaks, etc. This is where a beat sheet comes in. And as it was said, you don't have to have one. You don't have to use one at all. But when you're cooking a meal, there's a difference between comfort food and fancy food that only the exciting and adventurous like. And then there's this middle ground where you can have exciting comfort food or comfortable exciting food. And that's what the beat sheet allows you to do. It takes your your story that may not be structured very well, but it's a wonderful story, versus somebody who's just stuck in the rut in the tracks, and it makes this nice mix. Aaron, did you raise your hand? What you got?
I did. Because you mentioned this one here, and friggin' and this goes back to music, actually. Van Halen. Van Halen, if you listen to their songs, all their songs, 120 beats per minute. Why? They figured it out early on. That's the speed that they needed to get women out on the dance floor. Because there was an expectation. That's what they wanted to do. Go listen to their songs. Their songs are not that great, but it got people out on the dance floor. And once they're dancing, that adrenaline hit, all that chemical and all that stuff. But there's much, much better lyrical songs that are out there, but they figured out the beats.
So what we're saying is pattern recognition is built into human beings, and it's comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's why beat sheets can be helpful. Now, moving beyond that, here's what I'll say. I almost never use a beat sheet. But since I wrote my first novel, I have recognized the importance of pacing. And I studied beat sheets to at least have the rough idea of at 25%, 37%, 50%, etc. These points. What happens between there, we can work with. But Silver and Smith, both of them, I did very specific beat sheets. The first one was the cards. So I had 28 cards with the beat sheet points, and I mapped it out like this, and I had the extra blank cards, and I went and I wrote it all out, and I put it aside, and I almost never looked at them and wrote the book. For the second one, I went and got the computer Excel spreadsheet that calculates the word count and the page count with your font and tells you exactly what page this should be on, and I laid out my story keeping the gist of that beat and that beat and that beat, and then defining what it would be in my book, and then I must have looked at it 3 times while writing the book. Just put it down and wrote. So I don't know if I actually used one. In spirit I did.
To interrupt, the fact that you wrote it down, you said it in your head, you may not have, you intuitively set yourself up to use it.
Right.
Whether or not you functionally used it, but you set yourself up. You did the legwork.
Well, something that's very important to me is to be flexible in my story, and pretty much every book I write, I will give a rough fading outline. By that I mean what I'm working on today has 3 or 4 lines. By the time I'm working on how Act 2 bleeds into Act 3, sometimes literally, it's a few words. So it just kind of fades because I don't want to hard plan and plot that. And almost every book, by the time I hit that 50% point, I'm off of whatever pacing I had planned, wherever the story was going. There's been a shift or a change, and I want to allow for that, but still keep the beats. And yeah, I did that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I used when I wrote the mystery book, or the mystery manuscript. It's not a book yet. I used it to frame my outline.
Right.
Because when I'm writing, and I have read, don't ask me for titles or anything, but I have read books.
Oh yeah?
Where, yes,
Prove it.
Stuff happened, and they were on those beats, and it was great. But books, unlike music where you have the beat and you're dancing and you can ignore the words, you can't ignore the words in a book. So the story and your character still have to come first. So even though you're using a beat sheet to help you with the plot points, that's why I said for writing a novel, if a particular beat is supposed to happen on page 20, letting it slide to page 21 is probably okay, because it's not a single word, it's an event, it's a scene, it's something happening. So it might actually be starting in the last 2 sentences of page 20, but on page 21 is where you really hit the meat of it, and you can say that you have accomplished that beat.
Well, and the big thing is,
like for a clue, it is not, oh, here's this clue,
right,
an iron pipe. All right, there's the lead up, where they're at, they're fine. What's happening with the character at the time? Are they in a rush in this place, or do they have time to look? So those are things that you can't ignore in a book. So you need those beats, but you need the words too, especially for books.
Well, and on that vein, heartbeats, beats, rise and fall. They oscillate. So you're going to build up to a beat, or you're going to drop down to a beat. It's a roller coaster that you're dealing with.
So being on the beat doesn't mean black and white, cha-ching, here's this thing. It's being in the motion of creating that reveal, that moment, or whatever. So with the mystery, if you're looking for that clue, well, they know the murderer came through here and dropped something, and they have to find it. So you're in the beat, even if you haven't revealed the pipe that's hidden, in the bushes or whatever.
Now, would I suggest you hit that beat on page 30 when you're supposed to hit it on page 20? You better have some good stuff happening in there for it to work.
And when you give it to your beta readers or even reread it yourself, you'll see it. You'll see, maybe I can take some of this dialogue and move it to after this moment because, it just drags too long.
Yeah. Or you need to make your book longer because there's more going on than just the framework. Because remember, it's at percentages. So I never know. I never start with a planned word count, which is why sometimes I write a novella. Sometimes I'm writing and it's finished somewhere between a novella and a novel. And then sometimes, it's a full-length novel. Because the story dictates, when you're writing it, when you're done, you're done. So that's why when I use that beat sheet afterwards, when I was writing, that's why I went to make sure that I had hit those beats at about the right time. And then I used it to edit afterwards. And I did. There were a couple of things like, this is a characterization bit. It really doesn't matter where it is as long as it's in the first half of the book. You can't have this characterization, development happen 3 pages before the climax. It had to happen in the first half of the book. So I could move it to a discussion after some of those mystery, beats happened. So that's it helps you to, especially when you're writing in a genre that you haven't written in before. I've read mysteries. I love mysteries, but I hadn't read them or written them. And I will say once, Travis said, hey, why don't you use a beat sheet? And I went and found one. And then I went back and I reread some of my favorite mysteries. I'm like, wow.
I know, it's crazy what the framework is.
There were some of my favorite mysteries. I went back and I looked at them and went, they're nowhere in there. So it is a guide. Like I said, it is a guide only. And it's possible that for those mystery writers, they started with it and then they were able to play with it.
You've got to also keep in mind with mixed genres. For example, Silver and Smith is a bit of a mystery. Both of them, but definitely book 2. But I'm not working the mystery beat sheet. I'm working kind of your standard story or your sci-fi type beat sheet. And so I can work the mystery beats into it at the right place, but I don't have to stick to it. And it still carries the story forward as a mystery unfolds and reveals itself with the hints and whatnot. And Tara, you mentioned a couple of those that later you're like, oh, I thought something was up with that. Yeah, Aaron?
Well, on that vein, you've got the classic example, because we always have to mention it, Star Wars. Star Wars is, its beat sheet's not a sci-fi, its beat sheet is a Western, or a fantasy in a lot of regards. But some of the other great ones, you look at some of these mysteries that are out there, their beat sheets are capers, or heists instead. So you've got the setup, you've got the setup, the heist itself with the caper, the double cross, and then the twist or reveal at the end, to find out what's actually going on. Clue is not a mystery, it's a caper that you're finding out what's going on. But it's still a great mystery. Um, and that's why it works well on film, but it wouldn't work really well in book format because you can't follow it along. You need all those visual cues to see everything that would happen.
Well, there's a lot of times I
And
read a book and they've got so much in characters' heads. I'm like, this is why it would be a horrible movie. And this is with epic fantasy quite a bit. You get into characters' heads and feelings and landscaping. And to turn epic fantasy into a good movie, you've got a whole different set of challenges, because this is why they write extra content in, such as love stories that weren't there, because you can't climb into a character's head in a movie.
well, Clan of the Cave Bear is a classic example of that one. The old Daryl Hannah movie. 90% of that book was in her head, and then they tried to adapt it.
It's a 10-minute short.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, they did what they could.
Yeah, when you have characters that, some of the characters don't have language and can't speak, how are you going to have dialogue? Now, I've watched that movie, and I actually really like it, but I'd read the book, and so it was a movie for folks who loved the book and wanted to see it. But yeah, there are some books that just do not make good movies. And it's not because they don't hit the beats. Like because Travis had mentioned, beat sheets originally came from movies. And it's not because they don't hit the beats, but because they're hitting those beats in somebody's head. So
let me.
and there's
I'm sorry. Finish
Go
your
ahead.
thought, then pass it over.
I was going to say then, and there are specific beat sheets for different genres. And if you're working, for instance, in a trilogy and you've got mysteries, and so each book follows the mystery beats, but you have over the course of 3 books, a romance. It's the B story, and it's going to be over the 3 books. Go get the romance beat sheet and then plan it out. Okay, so book 1 should have all of the first, that first act stuff should happen in book 1. Book 2 should have the act 2 stuff. And then book 3 should have the act 3 stuff of that romance, the romance beat. So you can use these not just for a single book, but if you're writing a trilogy or multiple books, go ahead, because it helps you to then plan out. You don't want the whole romance to happen in the first book if you need to bring it out to the end. Let's look at Twilight. She wrote that first book. She didn't intend to write a number 2 and a number 3, and the romance finished, and so she had to do the breakup with another romance and then another. So if you're planning something like that across, it's a B storyline across a trilogy or something, hey, go get one of these beat sheets for what your B story is going to be, and use it to help you plan what happens in book 1, what parts of it happens in book 2, and then the wrap up in book 3, and just break it up across those acts. Then of course you would have the beat sheet if you're using it for the main story in each book, and that completes in each book. It's a good way to help you plan things out, especially if you're going to have a longer arc across several books.
Well, and that's where we were talking earlier in regards to the one, and I've mentioned on air before, the Icarus Black series. I'm planning on 9 books, 3 sets of 3, and the 3-act play comes into here. The first act is your rise, and of course you've got the second act is your fall, and then you've got a third act, which is your rise again. The classic Star Wars novels of New Hope, Empire, which is just a dark movie in comparison to New Hope, and then Return of the Jedi, which has got that nice upbeat again. But everything flips on its head, and you're watching it. The beats go up, the beats go down, and then you break those down again when you're looking at 9, and you go, oh, book 1 goes to book 2, which goes to book 3, and then you're watching that oscillate and go up, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how dark do I need to make this next one? What's the lead in to get me for the tone that I'm trying to set? And what's going to happen here? What are we going to do? What's our goal to get us to the next set of beats? I've got one arc or one graph, but I've also got another one that's going to match up with it in a lot of ways.
Tara, what I was trying to interject and add to your stuff there, you mentioned 5-6 minutes ago that beat sheet started out with movies. I disagree. Aaron came across basically a 6-point plot beat sheet from a pulp writer from the 20s and 30s.
Okay.
Lester.
Yeah, why don't you talk about that?
Oh, okay. So, who's a pulp writer, wrote quick 10,000 word, 10,000 word, not novellas, but friggin' magazine for pulp. And he said, always pick a new location, a new object, new villain, if possible. Have your action in the first 10%, majority of your story in the next section, and then finish it up. But if you change these couple things up, quick, easy, fast.
But he also mentions you have this happen, and then your hero gets beat down. You have this happen, then your hero gets beat down. Just constantly beat your hero down till you hit the end. And if you look at Silver and Smith, that's part of the formula.
Yeah. And if we want to talk formulas, let's talk about romance formula and the paper that I wrote when I was a student at ODU. I went back to, I read 3, at the time we're talking 2000, current contemporary romance novels. I read 3 from the 1950s. 1940s, 1950s, 1950s mostly, because I think that's when romance got big again. And then I went back to, because ODU, actually, that's Old Dominion University in Norfolk, where I got my bachelor's, actually had romance novels from the late 1800s, like 8 that were published in 1890. And I was able to find 3 of those. So I ended up reading 9 books. And then I pulled them apart for what is essentially the beats in the formula. And they all use the exact same darn formula. When you got down to it. You could take it and you could parse it out to the same basic formula, which, when looking at contemporary at the time, I was very devastated because I was like, really, we're still looking for, 100 years later, and we're still looking for, in romance books, we're still looking for Victorian men.
Yeah.
But yeah, formulas have been around since, Iliad and the Odyssey were written. It's the hero's journey. It's the most basic story. And yeah, it has beats. It has a formula. It has the whole hero's journey. It's got the whole circle that it's usually depicted as for that, with the different parts of it. But the idea of beat sheets, and that term beat sheets, forget the name of the gentleman that first put a beat sheet together and called it a beat sheet for books. He'd made that from watching movies.
Right. And yes, beat sheets themselves, but I was just pointing at the formulas are ageless, and we've had this.
Yeah.
And the pacing of a story has been known for 10, 20,000 years by anybody who knows the story. Or you ever heard somebody go, "Oh, your timing is off in the joke." That's the beat sheet for the joke. Every joke has a beat sheet. Even in Knock Knock, matter of fact, Knock Knock joke is a skeleton of a beat sheet for every joke ever.
Yes.
It's you have the introduction that makes the person go, "Who's there?" And then you have the twist on something. There's your joke formula.
For those interested, it's Lester Dent who did that, by the way.
Yeah, I feel like I should go read some of his stuff, because even if the stories are lukewarm, by that pacing that he described, if he actually hit it in his stories, they might be good stories.
Well, I mean, he was successful.
Yeah, he barely made a living. Um, so let's see, what else can we talk about with beat sheets? We've already kind of discussed what they are and how we've all referenced them at some point in time. We've discussed if they're necessary or not.
Beat sheet failures. Failure to use one. Has it hit you up anywhere where which one of your works just have you gone and go, shoot, I should have used a beat sheet here? Have I
Harbinger.
just
Harbinger, my first book. The pacing it's got all the elements, but they're in the wrong places. And maybe one day I'll pull it down and re-edit it, even if that just means writing extra story to move it to the right place, or cutting out parts to move it to the right place. But yeah, Harbinger, the elements are there, but they're slightly off, and because of that, the up and down, that roller coaster, that beat, it's off, and you lose people with it.
Yeah. And I think for some writers, they're automatically following those if they have read enough. And that's why they, the adage is you have to read a lot to write. And part of that is you're internalizing those beats in the genre that you are writing. So before I went to ODU, I went to TCC, and I took creative writing over and over and over and over again, because each time you took it, it was the same course with the same professor, but each time you took it, it was the next level up. And I finished my first ever manuscript in that class. And he said, I was taking it for like the last time because there was a limit. And he goes, you need to complete your manuscript or I'm going to fail you. So I completed the manuscript. And it's science fiction. And just for like, because it's still sitting unpublished. And, the kid's like, you need to publish that moment. It's really good. But it was the first I've ever done. And it's kind of like, it's, we're just going to tuck this away and pretend it doesn't exist. Well, I pulled that out one day and said, let me look at a sci-fi beat sheet and just start working on this. And did I nail them on the exact page? No. Sometimes it was a page off, but I had all the beats were there. But I grew up reading fantasy and sci-fi.
Let me interrupt, please. Can I interrupt?
So,
it doesn't have to be on the exact page in a book. If you're in that arc already, if you're in that mood, because I don't want to scare people away from beat sheets going, it's this prison railing, steel stone maze that you're locked into and you've got to do it right on. No, you don't. Get in the neighborhood. Get on track to hit the beat in the right area, and you're going to be fine. And that's all I want to say. I just don't want anybody going, oh, shit, I can't use a beat sheet then. It's got to be within a page. No. Also, it depends if you're planning on a 300-page book or a 30-page book, too.
I was just trying to say that you don't need it. If you're reading, if you read in a particular genre, and then you write in that genre, you're probably going to have internalized what those beats are. Because you probably, the books you like reading, hit them.
Go ahead.
Now, here's one for you, okay? So you've internalized them, you're writing your stuff, you're doing everything. Now, you as an editor, okay? How many people have lost beats in the editing process, which has altered the friggin' flow of the book on the final pass through?
I don't edit that heavy.
Okay. Yeah, no. You're a good editor, right?
I do copy editing, because what you do in development,
right, vice development or content,
you're looking at them. But I will give feedback if it looks as I'm like, okay, I'm getting bored.
Check.
Okay, because a lot of not everybody uses the beat sheet. Not people. People don't know what they are, and that's fine. I don't think you need one to write. You don't need one. So
as I said, you don't need one, but you need pacing. And beat sheet is the the pristine definition of pacing laid out for you. But here's what I have. I have a 7-point beat sheet. It's not a beat sheet. It's a pacing guide. So again, this is going with 3 acts. Act 1, first 25%. From 26 to 75 is Act 2. 76 to 100% is Act 3. And I'm going to read it off here, just straight down the list. And this is what I recommend to any writer. You don't need a beat sheet, but you need pacing. And you have to get those in the right neighborhood, otherwise, write it. You'll see what I mean. So Act 1 is your setup. This is everyday life, so you know what the character's normal daily life is. Even if they're a jungle explorer, they still have a normal life of hacking through the jungle or whatever. 25%, this is where Act 2 begins. Plot point 1 gives necessary info after the inciting incident to launch you forward. At 37%, and notice I'm using percents as opposed to page numbers or whatever. 37%, this is your first pinch point. This is when your antagonist shows muscle. And by the way, for the first, I have a note here in this, first 50% of the book, your protagonist is generally reactive, not proactive. At your midpoint, that often mirrors the end, and your protagonist becomes proactive. And by mirrors the end, I mean if you have a big fight scene and they win, but they lose the thing, it doesn't have to mirror then, but it often does. It gives you a taste of things to come. It's almost a false ending in some cases. And I've read books like that. It's delicious. 62%, your second pinch point. Your antagonist shows might again. 75%, this is your second plot point, that final information, that final impetus to move your characters into the climax. And also it's your darkest moment. All is lost. Everything sucks. And then at 75%, Act 3, your finale begins. And it's that simple. It's those points. And before I pass it over to you guys, if you don't mind, I see Tuesday has jumped in and says formulas and beats are only one form of writing. For most of history, the 3-act structure was not something that was largely followed for story writing. In addition, most formulas and story beats only apply to genre writing. You get into new territory if you're a lit writer. Beat sheets can be used well as a cheat sheet, but similar to the Pirates Code, they're more like guidelines.
Yes,
absolutely. Cool. But and it goes back to kind of the expectations and things like that. One of the notes that I had here was, and I've mentioned this before, Futurama, great comedic cartoon series. People love it. Okay, 22 minutes, beautifully crafted jokes and whatnot. It's got all the beats in all the right places. Everything's a 9 or a 10. Disenchanted, same writers, same staff, everything, no editing. But the pacing is off because they didn't edit things down. So we end up with this mess. It doesn't feel as good, even though it is. But everything's kind of skewed because you end up with these jokes that are 7 in there instead. They don't cut things out the way everything's supposed to. But it kind of leads to my second point of Tara mentions friggin' being a huge sci-fi fan from back in the day, probably my era. We got our Heinleins, our friggin' guys from there. The evolution of like sci-fi from the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, that's all kind of changed. The beats themselves, or the pacing has changed. The beats themselves are kind of the same, but the pacing's changed, which is something I discovered when I wrote Persona non grata. When I had it out for beta readers, alpha and beta readers, I cut the first 20% of the book because it was a slow build. And I was like, nope, this is the inciting incident. I had to get to that point almost immediately to capture the audience. If I didn't freaking cut it, it didn't make any sense. It was one of those, I couldn't, bored, cut it here, start at almost page 3. I have inciting incidents to get people going. Speed it up, cut the pace down.
I started...
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tara.
Go ahead, Travis. No, go ahead.
I've started 3 audiobooks today.
Mm-hmm.
I got a half chapter into 2 of them and turned them off. because at one point in time I would read a whole book, and heaven forbid it was a series, because then I was obligated to read the whole series even if I wasn't enjoying it. I had that issue. I no longer have that issue. If I get into a book, whether it's the narrator or the writing itself, if it doesn't capture me enough to make me go, yeah, I want to know more. And it doesn't have to totally hook me, it just has to make me go, I care about this character already, or I'm curious about what's happening, and the other thing isn't too bad. And this is why pacing is important, and recognizing your story and how to intro it. And of course, different genres, different things. What were you going to say, Tara?
And well, I was just going to say, one of the things, the idea of beat sheets and using them for novels really came into the thing to do and to use when novelists, when authors started making their money when their books were made into movies. And if they hit those beats in their novel, then it was very easy for a screenplay to be written.
Right.
And they stood a better chance of having a movie made.
Well, not only that, they became a consultant on the movie. Because selling the rights to your novel or an option was one thing. Mm-hmm. Being a executive consultant was another. You get paid twice for the same job.
Right. But I mean, just selling the rights, and movie producers, when they're going out and they're going, ooh, this is a big popular novel. Well, how much work do we need to put into this to make it into a movie script? And if your book already hits those beats in about the right place, they're going to go easy pickings.
Okay.
This is one where if it's one they really have to work on. No.
And if we can get some closing thoughts on this here, we'll wrap this episode up. Aaron, go ahead.
Case in point, Artemis Fowl, Ian Colfer, friggin' made a great book series. Disney Plus released the movie for free. Unlike Mulan, unlike anything else, they were like, nope, let's just hide this one in the middle of the pandemic. Horrible movie, because it didn't catch any of the beats and stuff like that. They just couldn't make it work because they couldn't get the beats to line up the way they needed to.
Tara, closing thoughts?
Beat sheets are great if you use them as a tool. If you're writing along and you're not having problems and you've got a beta reader, they read it and they go, hey, love it, the pacing's good, you're good to go. If they're looking and they're reading it over and they go, yeah, something, I got bored here or whatever, find a beat sheet for the genre you're writing in and just use it as a tool to help you find what needs to be kept and to find what needs to go. Because it could be that, no, there's something there that needs to stay. It's just you need to cut it down so that it hits those beats and you don't lose your reader.
Okay, very good. Say goodbye, everybody, and I'll take us out here.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, here we go.
Before we go, I want to remind everyone that you can email us at writenightshow@gmail.com. That's right with the W, night with an N, show@gmail.com. To let us know your thoughts on the show's topics, suggest other topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or just have a message read out on air to someone in your life. Thanks to everyone for supporting the show by downloading the podcast, sharing it on social media, grabbing some shirt stickers and mugs from bit.ly/tavern merch, or barware patches and hats from bit.ly/tavern merch too. It's bit.ly/tavern merch or tavern merch followed by the number 2. Thanks to everyone who joined us live at twitch.tv/Travis Tavern Talk, and everyone who supports the tavern by subscribing, hosting, throwing bits, raids, and most of all, commenting.
Thank you for joining author Travis Sivart and the other writers, content creators, and all-around amazing people for our discussion here on Write Night. Join us again soon, and until you do, make sure you create with passion, enjoy the journey, and remember, every night can be right.